There was always a part of me that wanted to do art, but it felt like I shouldn't. People who do well academically aren't supposed to do art. You know, people were always asking me if I was going to be a doctor, be a lawyer, not an artist. It's never on the list. I'm not like an artist in the sense that I paint or I take photos. People commission me to do blank. Like, I'm not that kind of artist.
Isa Pengskul is an award-winning Thai-American artist whose work challenges how we think about nature, culture, and the human-non-human dichotomy.
Got Pangan, that's where my Thai side of the family is from, as far as we can remember. It's near Koh Samui, which is a common holiday destination for Singaporeans. Being a kid, being on the island was pretty great because we would ride our bicycles to the waterfall, to the streams, catch fish, go to the areas where they used to plant rice and then find betta fish.
Her art has been featured on the Straits Times, DEC, LaSalle, and Vassar College.
When you go to art school, you're being taught about how to be the artist that you want to be, but you're not necessarily taught to be the artist that will sell. And I think that's great, you know, but it's difficult to survive after that. We should go back to the way Marx and Engels did it. We should have patrons again. Where's my patron at, man?
How was it like growing up in Thailand as a mixed kid?
Part of being mixed in a fully Thai community was that, you know, I had access to certain things that my peers didn't. Like, I could speak English, which allowed me to read a lot more books, because even on the island there was a bookstore at one point, and like a lot of the books were in English, so I could read them and my friends couldn't. And also things like the internet and like using a computer, like it was just a lot more easy for me to be able to like click on the start button in the Windows, stuff like that, and like find YouTube, whatever not, and you know, like Google stuff, whereas my friends couldn't do that. But yeah, I think that in a world that has like a lot of information and stuff like in English, and then being mixed obviously with an American parent gave me access to that. So that I think that already allowed me to like do a lot more things than my peers already at a younger age. Yeah.
So I want to ask two questions. The first is, how did you learn English if you weren't taught in school?
Yeah, I actually spent like a few years of my toddler years in the US. And
where?
In Iowa. So I started to learn to read already like when I was there. And then I came back to Thailand, and yeah, in school we weren't really like doing any proper English. We were learning the alphabet for so long, like the English alphabet for so long. And then up until like third grade, we were still learning words like cat, bat, rat, like things like that. It was just like so simple. And then, you know, it was just like super not great. So I think like it was mostly due to the fact that I was able to go to school like in the US for some time, that I was able to learn English. And then like I just loved reading, and my mom also tried to like help me, you know, do some lessons here and there. And I did speak English with my mom.
And you mentioned you lived on an island?
Yeah, I've been saying it in such an English accent, but it's Koh Phangan. It's in the Gulf of Thailand, and it's near Koh Samui, which is a common holiday destination for Singaporeans.
Oh wait, you grew up around there.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's the only thing I recognize.
Yeah, so that's like where my family is. My Thai side of the family is from, as far as we can remember. None of my dad's brothers or my grandparents live on the island anymore. They all like had to relocate because there was not enough land to make a living for them. My dad stayed back because he was working with tourists, and that's how he met my mom, because he was a taxi boat driver and like a person who would kind of try to get you to go to the resorts, or I guess resort sounds like such a fancy word, but it was just like huts on the beach, you know, to try to get you to these places. And so he would do that. Yeah.
And was your mom a tourist?
Yeah, my mom was a tourist.
Oh wow. And
yeah,
so how did their love story unfold?
I only like heard about it like vaguely, you know, but yeah, my mom came. She was like working in New York for some time. She's from Iowa, right? And then as soon as she could, she left to go to New York, and then she saved up some money and then went traveling and was in Thailand. And she went to Phangan because I think some guy in New York told her about it actually. And then my dad was a taxi boat driver, drove her to his like hut, whatever, that bungalow that he was working at. And I think it was like monsoon season. So I think she got like stuck there with him. I think that was the story. Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a very romantic story or like the start of a horror film. So, I mean, you came out of it. So I think it was a lovely story.
My dad's was not scary. So
what's your relationship like to your Thai background versus the American one, since you've spent a couple years in both places?
before this, I would tend to call myself like Thai, period, and then leave the rest up to imagination. I feel that I did spend most of my childhood, actually my whole life, like in Thailand. I think of some of my friends who are Thai, American, Thai, whatever, and some of them even grew up in Thailand, and then their Thai is either non-existent or not very good. And I feel like that is such a tragedy because that's like so much of who I am when I was in college. And then I would go back to Thailand, and then I would come back to college, and then I'd be like, oh, be stuck between two worlds or something like that. Because the way of living, especially on the island versus the way of living in the US is so different. And what we value, you know, and what choices we make, of who we want to become, things like that, it's so different. And I feel like because I'm Thai, well, because I'm from this island, and because my dad and my family was the way that they were, you know, I acknowledge that in every country there are a lot of different cultures, even throughout different families. But so I'm going to be specific about my family because they are the way that they are. I feel like that is also how I've ended up like to be an artist, to like allow myself to do that, you know, because I think I did quite well like in school and stuff like that, and people were always asking me if I was going to be a doctor or like be a lawyer, I don't know what, you know, just like something, not an artist. It's never on the list. And I was always feeling that kind of pressure, you know. That's why I did philosophy in college and not fine art as like my major. And I think it was that kind of pressure to like be something, be someone, and then like have to succeed in like a specific metric that I didn't feel, you know, when I'm at home, like on the island. Like I don't feel that way, because what it means to have a good life there is not the same as what it means to have a good life like in the US or even in Singapore, right? So I think by virtue of being Thai from this island with this family, I allowed myself to take this path that I'm taking now. Yeah.
And so your Thai family, do they ever ask you about being an artist? Did they pressure you to not be an artist?
No, they ask me what I'm doing, and then I'm like, I don't know how to explain it to you, because I'm not like an artist in the sense that I can just be like, yeah, I paint, or yeah, I take photos, end of story. Like, you know, people commission me to do blank. Like, I'm not that kind of artist even. So it's like, I don't even know how to say what I'm doing, but they're quite hands off in general, you know. Even my great aunt, like I'm pretty close with her, and she was like, you know, when you're over there doing things, like you don't need to tell me what you're doing. Yeah. Or my dad, you know, he like never would ask me like what was up. Yeah. It was like whether I wanted to provide the information or not.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're island people. And so like, can you unpack that a little bit more? I know you already kind of did, but like what did your day-to-day look like? Any specific memories?
For being a kid, being on the island was pretty great because it meant that like there was so much to do. You know, I could go climb a tree. I could like go to the beach. Okay, we never went to the beach unsupervised because that was a bit far from our house, but we would ride our bicycles to the waterfall, to the streams, catch fish, like go to the areas where they used to plant rice, and then find betta fish, get bit by leeches, like play games in the sand, stuff like that. I mean, it's still the same island today, like in the sense that all these natural features kind of still exist. Actually, some of them don't, like, are going away. But I think that kids these days don't even get to experience that as much, you know. I saw some kids buying like some bottles for betta fish because, you know, you put them in these kinds of bottles where it's like a sizable bottle, and they can swim like enough space for them and stuff like that. But anyway, these kids were buying the bottles, and then I was like, what are you guys doing with those? And then they were like, we're gonna put fish in them. And I was like, yeah, so where do you get fish nowadays, like, you know, as youngsters? And they were like, we bought them. And I was like, oh wow, okay. It's a very different life from me. Like, when we were kids, we didn't even have like, we weren't getting like a lot of cash from our parents even back then. Like there was no stores to go buy stuff when I was a kid. It was
Really?
like, I mean, like not really. Like when it was Christmas, my mom would go to like the one store that had like any stationery or whatever, and then buy me some pens or something. But it was like
That was your Christmas gift.
There was not a lot of shopping to do, and like nowadays you can go to like, I don't know, well, we don't really have these stores here, but like the big supermarket stores and like mega stores or whatever, not as huge as like in Singapore or whatever, but the fact is they didn't exist when I was a kid.
And so you lived largely off of the land?
I mean, there was like wet markets and stuff, so living off of the land. My parents didn't really garden, so not really, but like other people would give us some stuff from their gardens and stuff like that. Yeah.
And how did you find yourself getting a master's in fine arts?
There was always a part of me that wanted to do art, but it felt like I couldn't or shouldn't because it wasn't on the list of what smart people, okay, wow, I just really called myself a smart person, but like people who do well academically aren't supposed to do art,
According to who? Because your parents didn't put that pressure on you.
Yeah, definitely not according to my parents, but according to the world, like I could tell that people didn't think that it was like something legit, and I think that it's honestly one of the most ironic things because as I've gotten into art and like delved into the stories of different artists and like their work and stuff, I'm like, damn, these people are smart, like they're smart, they're interesting, they're doing things that are like different and like challenging people to think about things in new ways. And like they write interesting things, they make interesting things. Like, well, who said artists are dumb? Like, why is this like not a legit thing, that like we are supporting in our societies? And then it's also ironic because when societies do really well, then they're like, well, now we need art. And it's like creativity is so undervalued in our society when we so clearly like also appreciate it and like think it's like the pinnacle of civilization,
Yeah, I always think about this quote where the quote is, when bankers get together, they talk about art. When artists get together, they talk about money. And what it means is bankers who are, applauded for going into this productive field, when they get together, they don't want to talk about their own, their lives because it's boring. And so they talk about, oh, this coffee is so refined. This wine is like with these different tannins and this art. And they're like, kind of one-upping each other in terms of cultural knowledge versus the people who are providing that cultural nuance and that cultural addition to society are the ones that are asking for grants, are asking for money, for sponsorships, for recognition, even the baseline. And so I do agree with you just on many fronts. I think on one hand, it seems like, and this is coming from a very Asian perspective, but art seems very spoiled or like very privileged, where it's like, oh, if you can be an artist, you're either really rich or you couldn't go into the other fields that you just mentioned, right? But at the same time, it's like now that Singapore and in general society, as a society becomes more refined and more wealthy, they don't want to be known as just a city of a bunch of bankers and tech employees. They also want to be seen as like sophisticated and refined. So I'm just agreeing with what you just said my own way.
Yeah, I don't really know like that, how to change that. Like, I mean, I think that here in Singapore, the government funds a lot of arts, and that is good on one level, versus like being somewhere where there isn't any government funding, and then you have to do everything, like you don't even know where to like even begin to ask for money. And then that can also be quite complicated. So it's not to say that like, Singapore doesn't support the arts at all. Like it does, but as a society, I feel like we don't appreciate the arts enough. And that makes it difficult. It's like when, especially you think about, okay, like I'm going to buy something and maybe it's like a drawing that an artist made and it's a small drawing. and the artist made it like for an hour or whatever, and then they want to sell it for like, I don't know, $50, and then people are like, I could do that, and then they don't buy it. That kind of thing, where it's like, or maybe it's like more specifically labor that's being undervalued, like being a graphic designer, right? That was tough, because graphic design is an underpaid profession that literally everyone is using. Like, if you're marketing, you're using graphic design, and everyone's marketing in this economy.
I remember I was shopping with my partner, and I was looking at the wine aisle trying to decide which wine bottle to buy, and I was just like, it just feels like wine is a graphic design competition. Whichever wine bottle looks the best and at a reasonable price, I will buy. And then my partner looks at me and says, isn't everything a graphic design competition in this world? And I was like, you're so right. Like, if I'm buying yogurt, I'm going to buy a yogurt, container that looks nice. If I'm buying chips, I'll buy chips that look nice, right? Like, if I'm trying a new brand, if I'm just buying, it's like, oh, this one looks more refined. This one looks more my style. Even it stems down to like dish soap. There are like ways in which you can design the dish soap to look really like eco-friendly. So if you buy this kind of dish soap, you feel better about yourself because you're, buying from 100% recyclable material or something. Yeah. So 100%. Yeah, it's undervalued. I think it's funny as well, because I think good graphic design is really hard to put a price on. And yet it's hard to... The reason why I'm thinking about this is for the podcast, I hired a graphic design artist for the cover art. And I just knew like whatever he was charging, like the amount, I couldn't put a number on if he did a good job, how much easier my life would be. Because if you have the right cover art, then you can get people to click onto your podcast and listen and like trust the podcast. And so it's tough because, you can only look at his past credentials and you kind of just hope. But anyway, I'm kind of delving out of this, but yeah, graphic design is in every facet. We're humans, and we gravitate towards nice, pretty things, and we buy them.
Yeah, not to say that like art should be about making you desire in order to purchase it or anything like that, but I just think that graphic design is one of the most ironic like ways in which we clearly undervalue creativity. It's like literally working for the capitalist system, yet is not like valued enough,
Unless it's really good. Then you see articles about like how this graphic design like broke the internet and promoted this chocolate bar in a whole new way. But that's only after the fact, right? And you're kind of seeing it as a one-time thing, when in reality it's all around us.
Yeah.
What would be your advice for young artists in Singapore?
I am also an emerging artist.
Other young artists, younger artists.
I think that like it's okay. There's very simple things that I think people need to do in order to like stay motivated to even do the thing, right? Like, because I guess that's one thing. You see people abandoning their artist careers or whatever very, very quickly, very early on, before they have even really given it a shot. Like, I was overhearing this two young people in a restaurant, and the one girl was just graduated from some film degree something, and she was talking to her friend, and then she was like, it was literally they just graduated kind of thing, and then she was like, this is so difficult, that's why I'm not doing it anymore, this film thing. And then I look at them, and they're probably like not even older than 20, 21, and I think they were just talking about how they had just graduated like that year also. And I was like, what? How long did you even give it, girl? Like, how can you already say it's too hard? Like, did you even try? Like, this stuff takes a long time, and like, it's an art. I don't think people realize this, but like, art is also a lot about like networking and, meeting other artists, meeting other people who are curating, meeting, writers, whatever, like in the art scene as well. And you have to like go to a lot of events and stuff like this to meet people, see what they're doing. Maybe you'll get a chance to like collaborate with them, and who knows, like, you just don't really know until like you just keep going, you just keep trying. And then the other thing, of course, is like your practice. It's like you have to keep making stuff, and if you stop making stuff, then how will you grow? Like, how will you know what you're doing, and like your body of work, like you don't know what it will become and what it can become. Like maybe it's not great now, but maybe it will be great the next time. Maybe the next time won't be great, but maybe the next time after that, and sometimes it's not linear either. Like I've made things where I'm like, wow, I made, and that's like not that long ago. Yeah. And sometimes it's like, oh, I made that. Oh, that's cool, And so I feel like you just kind of have to keep doing it and have faith. Yeah. But I guess that's what I'm telling myself.
Yeah, my follow-up question is, how do you stay motivated?
Yeah, I guess, being an artist is definitely difficult. Not to say that this girl like gave up too soon or something. Like maybe she had, okay, I was definitely judging her, but like maybe she had her own reasons of like financial stability and stuff like that she needed to deal with, in order to make a living, because like being an artist is definitely difficult here. But right now I'm like being given some help, I guess, by how do I say, like just a lot of different people around me, right? Like right now I'm living with my girlfriend in her house, and so I'm like surviving off the generosity of like her parents and her brother too, I guess, although I don't think he had much say in this, but things like that like have allowed it to be possible for me. And I feel like because of that, I shouldn't just give up. Other people have been backing me. Like Vassar gave me money to go study this. There's like been opportunities presented to me, and I saw my horoscope for this year, and they're like, career good. So I'm like, okay, I better not give up. I also feel like out of everything that I've done, art obviously gives me like the most autonomy in some ways. Like I get to think about what I want to think about whenever I want to think about it. That's something that's quite amazing. Yeah. I don't know how long this is going to last too, so like might as well, do it for now.
Right. What would you say is next for you?
What is next is just to continue to exist in a way that I can like do my art. We live in this society that is capitalist and requires money to survive. When you have a full-time job, it becomes very difficult to think about what you want to do, like your passion projects and stuff like that, right? So yeah, I might be like at a crossroad point in my life where I kind of have to figure out, how to do that.
I wonder if there are any discussions within the art community about this balance between creating art for yourself and creating art because it sells. You just had an art exhibition, and you mentioned that there was a buyer who was interested, but because of the material, she was no longer interested. I think it was like because you made your art from paper, and paper doesn't hold well in Singapore's humid climate. And so I'm curious if you feel like there is a balance between like art is inherently an authentic and introspective venture, and people want that. People want that vulnerability. People want that authenticity. At the same time, needing to make a living in the capitalist society and like seeing art as almost like as a business, right? If you were to create a business, you would sell products that people want, not necessarily from. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I sound very like corporate, but I'm just curious if this is something that your friend group of artists think about or grapple with.
I was thinking about like going to. Okay, so to give some context, I recently have been Googling how like whether I should, incorporate myself as a business in the sense like should I do sole proprietorship or like LLC, whatever nots, and like and then just kind of reading the details about that. And then I realized that going to art school, at least in my experience, has not taught me anything about like how to be a small business, which is like kind of what you kind of have to do if you want to do art full time, like, yeah, I don't know what was happening in like the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, like were they also like thinking of themselves as like a small business, but I think that's kind of like what you have to do now. But then you're right, like it doesn't sit very well, the idea of like me making this art that is like quite, I don't know, sometimes not that easy to understand. It's not necessarily pretty sometimes. It's not necessarily collectible. Like it's more about the ways it might make you think if you see it. and it might not last forever. All these problems that are not actually problems, like they're actually part of my art. Like it's fine that it doesn't last forever, that's part of the idea. But it becomes a problem when you're trying to survive like as a small business. And
I mean, the reality is your customers care about those things. Those things like longevity, how can I keep it, what kind of material you use, even though it erodes your art to change those things because you were trying to make a point. But your consumer base, I guess I could say consumer base, the people that are collecting seem to care about those things.
yeah, so the thing is, like, when you go to art school, you're like being taught about how to be the artist that you want to be, but you're not necessarily taught to be the artist that will sell. And I think that's beautiful. That's good. That's great, but it's difficult to survive like after that, to kind of like come out of art school and whatever, and then have to take stock and be like, okay, I did all that and that was great, but now that I'm like out here in the world, can I still do that? Is it still something that, like, am I going to be able to survive if I like continue to do it that way? And then if my answer is no, I can't continue to be like super esoteric and strange, I need to be more palatable and purchasable, then like you have to figure that all out on your own now, because there's no like kind of like business school for artists. Here's my hot take. I think that we should go back to the way Marx and Engels did it. So Marx was just living off of Engels, right? This is what I hear anyway. But anyway, we should have patrons again, Where's my patron at, man? Like, why do I only have to rely on my significant other, my wife, my husband, whatever it is, to support me? Or like my parents? Why can't we like expand our models of financial reliance to other relationships? What if like our relationships were just like fundamentally different, Like, what if you had a friend who like was just really rich and then they just like funded you, or like maybe it's not you, maybe it's like someone that like some like kind of like a network kind of thing, maybe, although I guess that could end up being pretty exclusive in some senses also. But I think, right now, like I see not a lot, but I see some friends who are able to make their art because their partner has a full-time job that pays well, and then they don't have to like have a dual income household. But then that's the only way, man. And like, I don't think like if you are from class that, your partner isn't making that much and then they won't be able to support you, then what? That's it. Like now you have to find a full-time job, and like you will never be able to be the kind of artist who like dedicates their whole time to like their practice, And I feel like realistically applying for grants takes up so much time, man. Like I've been applying for something and I like, spend a good number of hours on it, in order to even apply, and then you don't even know if you're going to get it, and then there's like so much time that you end up having to use as an artist to just like ask for money. But in this model of like finding a patron, you would simply live and they would simply fund, and you would have a relationship that is not necessarily coming from like romance or familial ties, but is still a relationship that will fund you nonetheless, Yeah.
I think what's also important to point out ties back to earlier in our conversation where people, the general public, will reap the benefits of art without having to pay for it. And the reality is someone ultimately had to pay for it. Often it's the artists themselves through struggling, through menial jobs, for most of their life, or their partner has to take on that brunt. But the society as a whole gets to benefit the products, or I shouldn't say products, the art that is produced by these artists. And so understanding crowdfunding is something that can work, but also really difficult. Also, you're talking about grants, that being quite a difficult process. So recognizing that, hey, as a society, if you can and if you're able to, then consider sponsoring or being a patron of artists, because ultimately if you're enjoying art, like you may be enjoying art for free at a museum or at a showcase, but someone did pay for it, because the reality of our society today is that it very much runs on money.
Yeah, I guess that's like the cool thing about websites like Patreon or like Ko-Fi or whatever, that, you know, you can kind of like subscribe every month to get like creators, I don't know, to see their work, or like to get special perks if you pay more or something like that. But then I think the thing with those things also is like it puts a lot of emphasis on like productivity. Like if you don't produce, then you might be disappointing all your followers who are paying you $5 a month. But I'm hoping for like relationships where it's like you can just like exist, you know, and like create kind of with freedom, without that kind of like pressure of like, I have to meet this deadline that I told all my followers I'm gonna meet, you know, and I have to like produce this much by like this year. But the reality is like the creative life is in flux, you know, like sometimes you produce more, sometimes you produce better things, sometimes you produce less, and sometimes you produce shit. Like it's just like you never know, you know. And so like it's kind of impossible to promise that. And I think that in cases where like your partner's supporting you, then there's not necessarily like that pressure to be like, I mean, get like depending on your relationship with your partner, of course, and also like how much money they actually make, there might not be that pressure to like, you know, have to produce like 50 paintings a year, and they all have to like be so good, and like I have to have like so many shows and whatever. You can like kind of go at your own pace, you know.
Yeah, because inherently, if you look at most jobs and the way they're structured, or they were structured in the past during the Industrial Revolution, everything was fundamentally the same, quantity over quality. And that was valuable. Like the more you made, and they weren't like incredible works, right? Everyone was just one part of the bigger cog, or one cog in the bigger machine. But art is inherently so drastically different, and yet it's trying to exist in a capitalist society that was built on, you produce this pin which will fit into this wheel, which will then build out this car, and just produce as many freaking pins as you can, right? I'm now thinking about other forms of art, like authors, right? Like authors, the ones that we really remember, or the ones that are incredibly successful, are commercially successful because they are writing maniacs. Like they produce so much, and obviously their work is very different than this Industrial Revolution example where it's like a pin, and then because they're actually producing art, but they're just doing it at such a crazy intensity. And that's what capitalism applauds. It's the ones that can produce art that's like quite decent. I mean, it's decent enough to get millions of people excited about it, and just produce it for the rest of your life. Like just make as many freaking books and permutations. So like, for example, who is the author of all the horror stories? Yeah, Stephen King. I read his book. He's just like, I write like for, I think he says anywhere from like 4 hours to 6 hours. And he just does that every single day. He doesn't take a day off. And he produces at least one book a year. And so that's the kind of artistry that people really celebrate.
Yeah, I mean, that's the case for like Instagram and stuff, right? Like I literally see creators being like, it's quantity, not quality. Like just produce shit. And then you like see some pages where it's just like a lot of, I don't know what, just videos.
Permutations of the same idea that they just repurpose the...
I was listening to this podcast on my way here. In our lives, we focus so much on our main relationship with like our romantic partner. But then the reality is like they were talking about how, you know, divorce rates in the US are like 40 or 50%. And like more people are like living alone. And like, you know, there's like a loneliness epidemic kind of thing. And like, because people place so much importance on like having that single like relationship in their lives that you can depend on, right? Like we can only depend on our significant other, like our romantic partner, our sexual partner. And then that's like bad in so many ways, because it's like, and then they also become like, you've become financially dependent on them, but also, you know, you rely on them to like fulfill so much in your life, and it puts strain on that relationship also. Whereas like in the podcast, they're kind of thinking about, you know, what other kind of relationships can we have in our lives that you know can be fulfilling and like, you know, combat this like loneliness epidemic and stuff like that. And I feel like this kind of relates back to what I was talking about in terms of like, having people you can rely on to support you as an artist, and honestly, and a lot of times that's like also financially, right? Like that is goes beyond like romantic partner, goes beyond like your biological parents and stuff like that. And can we expand the definition of like being supported financially? I feel like finance is like such an interesting thing in our lives, because I feel like it feels so unimaginable to like, pay for someone else if they're not your friend or like something like that. We have like very, very particular rules about finance and stuff like that. Whereas like I think in some other ways we're more porous in our generosity, but money is like a very interesting subject and I think a lot of people approach it very differently. But there's definitely this line between like, you're my friend, like I would never let you like dip into my savings account, whereas like I have a joint like account with my partner, you know what I mean? It's like, why don't we have friend joint accounts? Like things like that. Why is our finance models like so limited to this like one, like the only person I can ever have a joint account with is my like business partner or my romantic partner, and then it's like that's it. I think that we have a lot of resources that we share, but money is like usually not one of them that we're so willing to like share.
That's true.
Yeah.
And this also makes me think about the nuclear family model that has been pushed out. And in the beginning, it was meant to protect women because, back then women couldn't work. And so if a woman's livelihood was entirely dependent on her father or her partner, and so to tie that male partner down, you set up the institution of marriage and you start creating nuclear families. I think when it starts falling apart is during the feminist movement. The second wave, I believe, Simone de Beauvoir talks about how the nuclear family model has isolated women, not only in depending solely on their male partner for their survival, but also that women cannot come together and support each other in emotionally, physically, financially. And so I see you also bringing in that portion now that feminist movements have progressed since Simone de Beauvoir's time, but the nuclear family model still exists and is still the ideal. And when you have that kind of model as like the standard, then people start getting very cagey about their money because all of their money is supposed to fulfill this nuclear family model. And they don't expect anyone else to help them. And so they are not willing to help others. And that's tough. Like it's tough in general on society. Lots of studies have talked about how for child rearing, you need a bigger family unit than, husband, wife, and the wife is also working full time, but also has to be the primary caregiver due to societal roles. So maybe you have a helper, so you outsource that as help. And so like they'd rather give their money to a stranger in exchange for goods and services rather than rethink their whole like sharing of finances model. Because the helper ultimately serves the family. But if you were to distribute your funds across like friends and family, then that's not exchange or a transaction. It's a bigger picture of what you're painting.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, this idea that I'm having or talking about is not an easy one to like rethink. So yeah, I mean, it's not easy, but it doesn't mean that like we shouldn't like think about it,
Or at least question it.
Yeah.
I don't think I've even thought about it until you brought it up. Because I think initially when you brought it up, I was like, wow, that's so out there. But you're right in saying that, like, or at least just questioning it. Why? Why are we cagey about this? Or very restrictive about the way we treat money? And it's not an individual's fault. It's truly like the way the society has been built and the structures and systems have been built to make us react this way. Everyone's just trying for self-preservation and just trying their best, right? So it's not an individual's fault, but at least questioning the system.
For sure. Yeah, because I feel like there's so much potential, I think, in being able to like uplift people in our society, and like there's more ways than one to relate to people and money than like it being purely transactional, you know. It's like you said, like you pay this woman to like come take care of your child, and then there's something that's happening that's going on there, right? Like a form is being born, like born, like while you're rearing this child, there's a bond between like you and the child, you know. Like say you're like, I'm talking about the person who's like living in the house and helping, but then because it's like this transactional thing, like once that transaction ends, your bond is also supposed to end. And I feel like that is also like it disregards like the ways in which like our relationships transcend money in some ways, you know. And like how can money like come in order to like support rather than like simply pay for and like like make a transaction. Yeah. And I think that this is about kind of rethinking the way we support arts, but it's also like about rethinking our whole structure of relating to each other. And I think this came up in like the previous conversation we had, right, about like ways that we can relate to each other that doesn't like solely emphasize like just our romantic partner and like the nuclear family. Yeah. So
it also makes me think about how there can be naysayers or people who are not supportive of queer people who are like, why are they going on about this marriage? You know, like why is that important? Just do what you need to do behind closed doors. Don't broadcast it. Why do you need same-sex marriage? And the reality of it is it's not about the marriage, right? We can move past the marriage. I mean, queer people have always existed outside of the framework of marriage. But it's the fact that the society that we live in today uses marriage as a medium in which to distribute wealth, in ways in which to distribute healthcare and just basic things that we need to survive, housing. And so marriage is really not the focal point here. We're not screaming just to get married. We're screaming for, or we're asking for rights.
yeah.
Right. So
Yeah. No.
yeah, we're really going off a little bit here, but
No, but for sure, like it all ties into each other, right? Like I feel like that is like if I'm saying, you know, why can't we expand our definition of reliance like to other people who are not just your like romantic partner, then like I'm also saying, you know, why can't we sign marriage license with our like friends and stuff like that, you know? Like why don't we radicalize the ways in which we think about like this dependence, right? And like that breaks down the whole idea of like you can only marry like the opposite gender, you know. Then we can marry our like, you know, partners who are women if we're women, you know, also, right? Like I think that it's related, you know, what we're talking about. It's like if we just break down that whole idea of like who we can depend on only based on like, I don't know, like our sexual orientation, then we can depend on like it opens up so many doors of like, yeah, and it doesn't restrict like dependence to be between like male and female couples, right?
and that really breaks down neoliberal capitalism, because the whole idea of, and this wave of neoliberal and late stage capitalism is that you just pull yourself out of your bootstraps. You hear about all these success stories that are lauded, like, oh, I had nothing, and then from that I became a millionaire, or I became really successful or whatnot. And that's all fine and dandy until you realize like those people are the exception and that have succeeded despite the fact that the odds have worked against them. Why are we not questioning why the odds are working against them? And so when you're promoting this idea of dependence or radicalizing, I don't want to even say radicalize, but I guess it's true though. You are radicalizing the idea of dependent patterns.
Queering.
You're queering. You're also, it feels like dependence is a dirty word in the way that we have built up society.
We're not allowed to depend on other people.
No, because we're pulling ourselves up from our bootstraps. We're, you know, successful despite our age or gender or poverty, initial poverty when we started out. Like, it's to say that to promote dependence in this society, it's almost like, wait, so you don't have the chops to succeed on your own. And I think when you exist in like more of the traditional corporate setting like I do, there is that pressure of like, no, I just gotta make it on my own. And I think when you are an artist and you already exist in the fringe of society, because capitalism is not built for artists, despite the fact that we love reaping the benefits and the artwork that comes out of artists, you're able to have a much more nuanced perspective. While I feel like I'm in the cage and I don't see it. Like I'm just like, yeah, this is just the way of the world.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. I'm just forced to.
Yeah, which is why I think like queer people have the most nuanced experiences just by the fact that they're queer, right? They could be, everything else is just like straight on paper, you know, like they're working at a traditional banking firm and everything, all their T's are crossed and all their I's are dotted. But just the fact that they're queer already makes them question the way that society works, because society has not been built to account for them. And so when you start deviating a little bit more, you start getting very, very good questions that are asked.
I guess so. And you also become annoying to some other people who fit the system, you know?
The system works for them, so why would they question it? And in fact, they're probably the ones that would be the most helpful, right?
Sure.
They're the ones that have reaped the benefits. You were initially hesitant of coming onto this podcast because of the idea of grouping all queer people together on a podcast. And I think you said something that I'd really love for you to expand on, which is queerness is not my main issue.
Yeah, because I feel like, you know, there's a lot of different parts of my identity that like work against me, for lack of a better way to put it right now. But, you know, if we're talking about the issue of housing, which just came up, then the reason why I can't get my own house in Singapore is not simply because I'm queer, although being queer definitely is part of it, right? But it's also like my nationality not being Singaporean, and it's also because of my occupation, an artist, not making any money to like be able to afford my own condo, because I know like some people who are queer here and then, you know, have bought their own condo. So it's also like a matter of class, right? And I'm also, and then, you know, you could be single here and not be able to afford a house also. So I feel like it's actually like multi-faceted, like why I'm not able to like find a house in Singapore, right? So I think that's why I say like queerness is not my main issue. People in the lower class sometimes share struggles with people who are queer, like because of certain reasons, right? And like it's an intersectionality thing. If you're queer and rich, then you can afford a house. And if you're queer and you're not rich, then, you know, you're pretty much screwed. But then I think that it's like also the same for people who are like single. So then that's, I guess in that case, that's when like, you know, it becomes a class issue, like more so than a queer issue, like specifically. Or like it's both of these groups' issues, you know? And so it's intersectionality in the sense that both these groups have the same issue.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit a like and subscribe down below. 3 seconds from you makes a massive impact on getting more people to hear the inspiring stories and advice from our guests.